Hey guys, how's it going? Srey here. So, how good is Probius really? Well, it turns out Probius is pretty good. And that's actually a fairly good assessment. Probius is just fairly good. Not OP, not underpowered, but just kind of in the middle, maybe on the little upper side of things. Um, I'd say that as far as specialists go, probably one of the best specialists though, because most specialists are kind of just split push or they don't have enough wave clear or they don't really contribute enough to team fights or whatnot. But Probius actually does quite a lot for the team. You just want to make sure you have a comp built around that. And I'll go into the comp more in a little bit. But first, let's talk about Probius. So Probius is a probe from Protoss, the Protoss race from StarCraft, StarCraft 2, and basically the design team went with a kind of cannon build, kind of cannon rush build. So the way you play Probius is you basically create these pylons, and you can create photon cannons, and you create warp rifts, and you can explode the warp rifts with disruption pulse. And Probius is actually one of the most fun heroes to play, at least for me at the moment. The sound effects and everything, the design is really, really fun, and I think they did a really good job with Probius. Probius is one of those heroes that can't mount and instead has a movement speed buff when you hit your Z. Also, Probius moves about 10% faster, quote unquote, by hovering over the ground. So when you activate Worker Rush, which is Probius's Z, it's a 30-second cooldown, and you gain an additional 60% movement speed, so you have a total of 70% movement speed for 5 seconds. But if you take any damage, this effect ends early. Worker Rush is always active at the altar, so that means if you ever spawn in base, you can run out of the fountain. And the Worker Rush will take you, it'll speed you for about the distance between um, your your base and the front gate of the kind of the first keep. That's kind of the distance it'll take you. So Worker Rush does not help you in a team fight if you're taking any damage. So any kind of damage over time effects like Lunara, Tracer is a really, really big threat for Probius, because if anything gets on you and you can't Z before you take the damage, it's going to be very, very hard to play Probius. You're just going to die basically if you don't have any peel or assistance from your team. Now, something else to mention for Probius is that although Probius is exceptionally squishy, has among the worst auto attacks in the game, Probius does have among the best wave clear in the game. You could even say maybe the best wave clear. Probius has better wave clear than Rag for the most part, especially since he's ranged. And that wave clear comes from his Warp Rift and his Disruption Pulse. So we'll cover Warp Rift first. So this is W. You open an unstable Warp Rift at a location that takes 1.25 seconds to arm, and then slows nearby enemies by 25%, lasting 9 seconds. If you actually just run through the rift, you won't be slowed at all once you leave. The slow dissipates almost immediately. But the rift itself lasts 9 seconds. An armed rift explodes when hit by Disruption Pulse, which is your Q, dealing damage to nearby enemies. It also stores up to 2 charges, so you can use them one after another. So it just looks like this, and now you can see it's armed. So I'll do it again here. Let me just get rid of that one. And it's not armed yet, and once you hear that nice deep sound, it will become armed. And what armed means is that it'll start to slow enemies, and if you hit it with Disruption Pulse, it will detonate. So Disruption Pulse just fires a burst of energy forward, 3-second cooldown, dealing a lot of damage through all enemies hit when it passes through. And when it hits the center of the Warp Rift, it causes the Warp Rift to explode, dealing additional damage. So you can see here that if let me just create a pylon here real quick. If I hit the center of this Warp Rift, it will detonate. Now, you can see that I had to use a pylon here to regenerate mana because Probius actually doesn't regenerate any mana and has quite high mana cost. You look at this, 150 mana cost. I think that might be the highest in the game. But Photon Cannon and Warp Pylon don't cost any mana. Now, if you're in the Pylon range here, you can see the energy field, and you just place a Pylon anywhere. You can only have 2 active at a time. Just on Warp Rift, you can have as many as you want active, but obviously they only last for 9 seconds. So I can make 2 here. You can also detonate 2 at once with your Q. So if I'm in with this Pylon range, it's going to quickly regenerate my mana. And if I have a pylon here, this lasts indefinitely, by the way, unless it's killed or you place more than 2 pylons, the oldest one will disappear. So if I place a photon cannon here, within the power range, it will basically immediately spawn. And these photon cannons are quite strong. So your E is warp in a photon cannon that deals damage, lasts lasts 13 seconds and must be placed within a power field. It deactivates if this pylon dies. So this pylon actually has a lot more health than, or sorry, the cannon has a lot more health than the pylon. So if you're attacking a Probius and he has like one pylon and one cannon up, you should definitely be killing the pylon first if that's possible. And the cannon does not prioritize heroes. It will just attack from what I can tell, the nearest thing, and it'll keep attacking that thing until that thing either dies or gets out of range. So that's something that's important to note. And the tower actually hits quite hard. The cannon it attacks for 230 per second, and if you compare that to like Distortion Pulse, it's almost it's like 2/3 the damage or something like that. Now, so we have basic abilities covered on Probius. So the way you play Probius is you basically spawn pylons as much as possible. The most important thing on Probius is to spam your abilities as much as possible, constantly pushing enemies in. And when the wave here spawns, so I would just keep creeping along the map here and place these ahead of when the minions are here. Fortunately, it's going to attack that, and you can blow up the wave almost instantly. Fortunately, they aggroed onto that. And then you keep sieging here. Oops, I meant to place the cannon. And you basically just push. You don't always have to detonate your Warp Rift. You can leave it in the middle there because not only does it grant vision, but it also slows enemies. So if you're sieging a gate and they're trying to walk through, they have to walk through the slow, which you could also detonate to deal additional damage. And you basically just siege up like this and play extremely. I don't want to say aggressively, but you play kind of relentlessly might be a better word. So you're constantly doing damage, you're constantly sieging, and you want to wave clear as much as possible. So Probius, not the best hero in fights, and definitely, like you cannot chase heroes on Probius. If a hero has like 10% health, like if Vala has 10% health, that Vala will 1v1 you. If she's able to dodge your W, because it takes a 1.25 seconds to arm up, and then you have to explode it as well. So you cannot chase on Probius pretty much at all. It's very difficult to do. So you really want to make enemies come into you, and then you can turn on them with your photon cannons and your whole field you have laid up. You can see that these pylons actually also granted a decent amount of vision. It's not the full radius here, but it's a decent amount of vision, and the cannons will also grant vision. But neither of these structures see over terrain. So if you place like a pylon on this side, it's not going to reveal anything on the other side. But with talents, you can change that a little bit. So let's set some stuff here. And again, playing Probius, I just want to hammer into you guys that it's the most important thing about it is that you're constantly casting spells, you're constantly pushing waves. If you're pushing waves in, the enemy team can't attack you, or I mean they can, but then they're giving up soak. And if you survive their gank, then they'll lose a lot of soak. They have to make a decision between clearing the lane and attacking you. And if you're clearing it really quickly and you just leave and you go to another lane, it's going to make you a lot more annoying and difficult. You're going to get a lot more effectiveness off. Probius is also a great solo laner, one of the best solo laners in the game. But doesn't always translate to a good late game, a good team fight. If you don't have your forts up, you don't have keeps up, it's going to be quite difficult to play Probius, especially if they have any kind of assassins on their team. Zeratul, Valera, pretty much any normal assassin just will almost one-hit you. Like if Greymane gets on you, you're pretty much just dead. If Tracer gets on you, you're dead. So it really requires peel from your teammates, and that's why I say that at lower levels of play, people aren't going to punish you nearly as much as they should, because if you're just casting pylons and you're playing up with cannons and stuff, they're gonna not. You have to commit to Probius to kill Probius. You just commit. You kill the turrets. You kill the pylons. You kill Probius, and then Probius. If once you're on Probius, it doesn't really do anything. But if you're trying to poke Probius down, like it's not gonna work very well unless you have something insane, like a Chromie and you're hitting Chromie spells. Chromie combo almost one hits Probius, so there's a lot of things you have to kind of watch out for. But the number one thing is you don't want to play too far up when you're playing Probius. When you get against better players, they will be able to just commit on you. They'll just, like a Murden's not going to be scared of your photon cannon. He's just going to jump right on you, and you better hope that you have an escape or peel from your team. So you'll get punished a little bit harder versus better players. The comps you want to play Probius on the maps. So let's cover maps first. The maps you want to play Probius on are wave clear maps, rotation maps. Not good, or not that great at least, on like Battlefield of Eternity. Could be decent on Braxis, but the best maps for Probius are really like Infernal Shrines, Tomb of the Spider Queen, Dragonshire. those kind of rotation-based maps like Cursed Hollow, Towers of Doom, not really the best for Probius. Still possible to play, obviously, but not the best. Maps like Haunted Mines and stuff, Probius has the best, or some of the best wave clear or camp clear in the game, especially when you're doing the sapper camps, because they have relatively low health. You can AoE them down really easily, and you can take the camps out very, very effectively. To do the camp, you'd basically, I don't have any talents, keep in mind, on Probius here, but you basically just spawn this, you throw your W down, you create a turret, and then basically just do camps like this. And you can tank it between yourself and your structures. And yes, your pylons will die, your structures will die, but not really a big deal. Missed my Q there. You can see you can do it fairly quickly, and you can get the camp. So you can do the camps in about 15 seconds, which is quite fast, and you take almost no damage as well. So if you clear out a wave here, like if I clear this wave out, throw my W, the wave walks up, I clear both of it, and I can immediately go over here or to the camp and set up for a clear. So you can do that very effectively. So I know I've talked about quite a lot about that, about Probius gameplay, more than I usually do on most heroes, but I just want to hammer that in because it's a little bit different. It's definitely a different playstyle than other heroes in the game. Okay, let's start on talents now. So level 1, we have Echo Pulse, Warp, Resonance, Gather Minerals, and the talent you want to take here is generally Gather Minerals. So there's going to be some difference between like high level play and your average play. Most of the time in Quick Match and Hero League, you can get away with the build I'm going to give you, but sometimes there's some other talents you might want to take. So Echo Pulse, you fire your Q, and after 1.25 seconds, after reaching its target, it comes back for a return trip. So you can see here, if I take this talent, it's going to hang there, and then it's going to come back. You can also see that if I shoot like this, it'll come back, and the following phase can also activate any kind of rifts, or anything like that. So you can do things like that, and not really the best talent. 75% damage on your Q, not a lot of damage, not really worth it overall. I would never take Echo Pulse. There are some builds you can go for a Q build, but I don't find that they're as effective. Warp Resonance is a quest talent, so after hitting 10 heroes with Warp Rift Explosions, increases the damage by 100, which is a decent amount. I believe it scales as well. After hitting 20 heroes, you gain an additional charge. So instead of holding 2 charges, you can hold 3. This can be good in competitive. A lot of times it's what you want to take over Gather Minerals. But other than competitive play, I would advise you to generally just go Gather Minerals. And Gather Minerals is really interesting. Enemy heroes and minions drop minerals when killed. Collect them to increase the health of a photon cannon by 8 for every mineral you collect, up to 560. And after collecting 70 minerals, the photon cannons deal an additional 25% damage and can see over obstacles and reveal nearby cloaked units. So this doesn't take too long to stack. You basically just need to kill 30 minions, which isn't that much, especially if you're double rotating. You get 7 per wave. It's just it's like 10 waves, so you can get it fairly early in the game, almost always before level 10. If you're doing it effectively, even on big maps, even if you're only in one lane, you don't rotate, you can still get this done effectively. And it increases the health of cannons by 560. So if you're wondering how much 560 is, well, I actually have some numbers that I calculated. They're not 100% accurate, but they're fairly accurate. So a level 1 turret photon cannon has about 980 health, so almost 1,000. So if you're increasing it by 560 at level 1, that's going to be more than a 50% increase. And obviously, you're not going to have this quest done at level 1. But at level 20, turrets have, or the cannons have, almost 2,000 health, so 1,960 health. And if you have the quest done at level 20 with this, it's going to increase that to 2660 HP. So it's still a fairly noticeable increase. And if you finish it before level 10, you're still going to have a very large increase in health on your cannons, maybe about like 30% increase, which is definitely noticeable. Plus, it does increase damage. Plus, it reveals nearby cloaked enemies, and it also lets you see over obstacles. And what this means by seeing over obstacles is that if I take this quest talent and I complete quests, you can see that it can see over terrain within its vision radius. So not the most useful, but definitely the best here at level 1. At level 4, we have some interesting options. Photon Barrier. When a photon cannon is alive and powered, Probius gains 30 spell armor. Turbocharged. Worker Rush grants an additional 20% movement speed while in a power field, and its cooldown is reduced by 10 seconds, so from 30 to 20. And Shield Capacitor. Probius gains permanent shields equal to 10% of his max health. Shields regenerate quickly, blah, 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 as long as you haven't taken recent damage. So Probius has among the lowest HP in the game, and when you get 10% of his max health, that's not actually that much health. That's not to say I don't take this talent, though. I actually think that Sometimes, maybe about half the time, it's worth going shield capacitor here, and the other half it's worth going turbocharged. Photon barrier, not really worth it. A lot of times you might not have your cannon up, or you might just get more effectiveness from either turbocharged or shield capacitor. So turbocharged makes it so you move at 30% movement speed whenever you're within a within pylon and radius, and obviously 30% movement speed is or 130 or 30% is the same as mount speed. So you actually have mount speed, or normal mount speed at least, when you're within this radius. So if I take the talent here, you'll notice I move a little bit faster. And that's actually quite significant if you consider that Probius has no ways of escape. So you can't actually use Worker Rush, as I said, when an enemy is on top of you because it'll just cancel the effect. But you can use turbocharge to kind of get out of range of someone, and then you can Z away. And you can obviously Z very, very, very quickly. So it's very useful. And I also believe that this talent stacks with Worker Rush. So with this talent, you'll have a total of 90% movement speed when you're within this location. I think so. Where's the movement speed? Yeah, you 190% movement speed, so it's definitely 90% there. Okay, so shield capacitor, I would go if they don't really have a lot of die for you. You're not really feeling threatened. It'll just reduce a lot of the kind of poke damage you're receiving. And if you have this talent combined with another shield talent later on, combined with the globes you're picking up, and you don't have a healer or something, it'll actually keep you very, very, very well topped off. And you can say, because you never need mana on Probius, you never need to go back to base for mana. It'll only be because of health, and it lets you stay on the map for much longer. Competitive play, you generally always want to go turbocharge though, unless you have some kind of specific comp. Okay, level 7 here. Particle, Accelerator, Distortion, Pulse deals an additional 10% more damage for each enemy or Warp Rift hit, up to 40%. Rift Shock, hitting an enemy hero with Warp Rift Explosion increases Probius damage against them by 20% for 10 seconds. Tower Defense, when Photon Cannon damages an enemy hero, its cooldown is reduced by 1.25 seconds. So, most of the time you're going to go Tower Defense. The vast majority of the time. It's just the most effective here. It's going to significantly reduce the cooldown of Photon Cannon. So you'll be able to have more than one up at a time, in fact, because you can see here there's a downtime of about 2 seconds. But if it's hitting heroes at a rate of 1 per second, you're going to significantly reduce the cooldown of tower defense. And keep in mind, if you have 2 towers up, you're going to reduce it even more. And I was testing it earlier, you can have like 20 cannons up at one time. Never realistic. You'll never have more than 2 maybe at one time. You'll never get 3 in a real game. But still, tower defense is quite good. You'll be able to place the cannon 5-6 seconds earlier most of the time. And the cannons do a lot of damage, so definitely effective. The other talents here, 20% more damage against the target, not really realistic, I'd say. And Particle Accelerator, it's going to do 40% more damage on your Q, not your W. So your Q does like almost no damage anyway, so not really worth it here. So tower defense. Level 10, we have 2 heroics. We have Pylon Overcharge, which increases the size of pylon power fields and allow them to attack enemies within it for 241 power damage per second, last 10 seconds. So 241 damage per second is more damage than your photon cannon. So your pylons basically turn into insane photon cannons. So if I activate these, you can see here that the range gets dramatically increased. So these are power fields. I can place cannons like way over here. It lasts for 10 seconds. And these pylons will attack heroes within this range. So this, or any hero is within this range. And these do prioritize heroes, I believe. Unlike the cannons, which do not prioritize heroes. So this is a very strong option. It also, you can notice here that they have shields now for 50% of their max health. So they gain permanent shields. So the shields obviously just regenerate if they take damage after not taking damage for a few seconds. So the other option we have here is, let me just reset this, is Null Gate, and it's vector targeting. So project a barrier of negative energy in the target direction that lasts for 4 seconds. Enemy who touch the barrier, take 140 damage per second, and are slowed by 80% for as long as they remain in contact with it. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. You can make a barrier here, and if they walk through this barrier, they're going to be slowed. Let me actually spawn a minion wave so you can see it better. Okay, so if they walk through the barrier, they're slowed dramatically, and they take a bunch of damage. Let's do this again, and you can see though, if I target it a little bit better, it'll actually be a little bit more effective here. So if I target it like this, it'll slow them basically for the entire time. So you can cast. You don't always want to make it just a gate like this. If there's like a choke point through where enemies are walking through, you might want to cast it like this or like at an angle or something. But overall, you can see these are the minerals for the quest talent. Overall, Null Gate is a good ability, but At the beginning, I was taking it quite often, but I just find that it's just not quite as effective as Pylon Overcharge. Even though it's a much shorter cooldown, it's a 30-second cooldown, you just get a lot more effectiveness out of Pylon Overcharge, and the 50% more shields is actually very, very helpful to keep these turrets or these pylons alive. 50% more health on them, and their shields as well, so they'll regenerate a bit. And then they also turn into really, really strong cannons. I just found that you get generally way more effectiveness out of those. It basically gives you actual kill potential. You can bait enemies into diving into you, especially if you have your pylons like in a bush or something, right? If you have a pylon here and you have a pylon here, like if I activate our overcharge, like look at the range, like they'll attack like everything in between, right? And then you can place a cannon here. You have your disruption pulses, and imagine a fight here where all the enemies are walking through, they're getting hit by everything. Just find it as very, very, very effective. Okay, so level 13, we have some interesting talents here. These are some of the strongest talents that Probius has. Aggressive Matrix, so Pylon's power field grants allied heroes 20%, 25% increased attack damage. So if you have like a Valor or something, like Zul'jin, this might be a good option. But generally, you don't take this talent. Power Overwhelming, Pylon's power field grants allied heroes 10% increased spell power and 2% or 2 mana per second. So the 2 mana per second isn't really for you because you have infinite mana anyway. It's more for your allies. So if you have like a Malfurion, you have some kind of sustained fight, this is really, really, really beneficial to keep your whole team topped off of mana. Think of like if you're sieging on Battlefield of Eternity, although I don't necessarily recommend that you play Probius on that map, but think about if you're sieging their Immortal and you're trying to kill it, and you guys are, an enemy team is all running and your team is very, very healthy on mana because of this ability. Note that this, because it increases 10% spell power, your cannons actually deal spell power. They don't deal auto attack damage, so you're going to increase the damage of your pylons by 10% as well as your both your basic abilities. So this talent is the most beneficial for you personally. And then most of the time at least, and then shield battery. So pylon power field grants allied heroes 57 shields per second up to 228. Obviously I'm level 20 here, not level 2, and it persists for 4 seconds. So it's basically, if I get this, you can see here that I build up a tiny shield, and it's not a lot, like 200 and how much is it? 228 level 20 is not a lot of shield. You can see it's fully stacked there. However, that being said, it does go on all of your allies. It is like permanent, like it'll always come back up. So you have any kind of prolonged fight. If you take damage, it'll pretty much instantly come back up. You can see that it shields immediately. This isn't, I don't believe that, I think that it constantly gives you 57 shields per second. You don't need to, if you take damage, it won't stop shielding you. It'll keep gaining the shield. So you're basically regenerating like 57 health per second when you're within this, as long as you're taking damage. So that's actually quite strong. I think it's definitely underrated, at least from people I've talked to who play Probius. They don't really like this talent, but I found it actually to be quite good. So if you take this talent, as well as shield capacitor, 10% of your max health, it'll actually give you quite good shields, like, and they're separate shields too. So this will always give you permanent shields, and your personal shield will regenerate if you don't take damage. So I actually recommend going this. If you're new to Probius, I would say go shield capacitor, and I would say get this shield battery level 13. And then I would say if you go turbocharge though, I wouldn't get the shield talent most of the time. Go power overwhelming instead. 16, we have quantum entanglement, and quantum entanglement. Enemies continue to be slowed for 3 seconds after their last contact with a warp rift. So right now, if they walk through a warp rift, they'll just immediately stop being slowed once they walk through it. Gravity well, enemies are slowed more the closer they are to the center of the warp rift, up to a maximum slow of 60%. Repulsor, enemies hit by a warp rift explosion are knocked away from the center. And interference, enemies hit by warp rift detonations have their spell power reduced by 35% for 5 seconds. Okay, so repulsor is garbage. Actually garbage. I would never recommend that you get that talent. Quantum entanglement is, the other 3 talents here are actually good. I think that's situational, or what you prefer. So gravity well is probably my preference most of the time. Enemies are slowed the more they are closer to the center, up to the maximum of 60%. So let me just get this to show you what it's like on minions. So the minions will walk through here, and you can see how slow they are compared to on the edge here. Extremely slow there when they walk through. See, that's a little bit less slow, but it actually does slow them significantly. Even if they're not dead in the center, it's still a very effective slow. Let me just turn minions off. Okay, so generally I prefer gravity well. The longer rift slow is also good. I think it's just preference. I don't know if one's necessarily better than the other. It might be matchups as well. Interference is actually quite good, especially depending on what kind of heroes they may have. Like if they have a Sonya, this actually is very, very good versus Sonya because she's going to spin on your team. And if you hit her, then she heals for 35% less and she does 35% less damage as well. So I think this is really good. And if you can get it on the back line, like if they have their spellcasters walking up and you're hitting like a Gul'dan or something, you're going to do prevent them from doing a significant amount of damage on your team. 35% for 5 seconds is no joke. That is a ton of reduced spell power. I think that's the most in the game besides like Shrink Ray or something like that, which is obviously better. But this is a constantly, every time you're popping your W, remember the range is actually quite far in your W. You can be all the way back here to hit a target. You can kind of spread it out like this, right? So you can hit targets from quite far away. So interference good. It's up to you though. I prefer gravity well. Level 20. We have construct additional pylons. Probius can now have up to 3 active pylons instead of 2, and they increase the damage of Pylon Overcharge by 25%. Gatekeeper, null gate lasts indefinitely if either end is within a power field. Only one null gate can be active at a time, obviously. I don't know if it goes on cooldown though, if you have one permanently active. Shoot 'em up, hitting a Warp Rift with Disruption Pulse causes 4 additional pylons that deal 50% increased damage, or that deal 50% damage to be fired from the impact location in different directions. Probius Loop, whenever a rift explodes, hitting 2 or more enemy heroes, create a new Warp Rift at the same location. It still has to arm them. Okay, so Gatekeeper, I wouldn't even mention this because shoot 'em up is better than Gatekeeper. So Gatekeeper, not really worth it. You're not really gonna get that much value from it. It can be fun to use Gatekeeper, but not really the most viable. Shoot 'em up. Let me just take this talent to show you what it does. So when you explode a rift now, you now get these things that shoot in different directions, and I believe it's your Q that will disrupt. So once it hits, it's going to fire in directions from there. I don't believe there's like a shotgun effect where if you're really up close, you'll get hit by all 3. But if you even get hit by 1, it basically increases the damage of your Warp Rift by 50% because it's, or not your Warp Rift, your Disruption Pulse by 50%. So it's still quite good. It does an extra 200 damage at level 20 every time you do it every 3 seconds. Whoops. So actually quite good damage there. Gives you more team fighting presence as well. It doesn't seem like that much, but it definitely adds up. Okay, so the other option is Probius Loop whenever rift, blah, blah, blah. This is not something that would ever go. I don't think this is viable enough to go for it. It's definitely interesting, but I don't think it's worth taking over what you should be taking, which is construct additional pylons. So Probius can now have up to 3 pylons, and you do more damage. So the additional pylon plus the 25% increase actually makes it so if you have all 3 pylons up, you do around 87% more damage when you have construct additional pylon and you pop overcharge. So you can see that this talent is very strong. That being said, you can't always set up 3 pylons before a fight. Like a lot of the time, you'll only be able to set up 1, maybe 2 pylons. You won't even get the 3rd down. Having the additional pylon is nice in certain situations, but it's not necessarily realistic to have it up. So most of the time, I would say go construct additional pylons, but sometimes you might want to go shoot them up. Might be more reliable. If you find that you can't set up consistently throughout the map, I would be going shoot them up. And if you find that you're consistently able to siege enemy turrets and stuff, I would go construct additional pylons. So that is pretty much it for Probius. Kind of a last minute advice I would give you for playing the hero is draft is very important for Probius. Having heroes that have good peel, having heroes that like you don't want to have just Probius as your main damage. Of course, you want like some kind of sustained damage. So Probius is your mage, and you want something like a Lunar or a Vala or at least like a Gul'dan, but preferably like a hammer, like any kind of hero that does good damage. Because you're basically just spamming crap at the enemies the entire time. You're spamming photon cannons, these kind of rifts and stuff. You want to make sure that if you have like any type of other builder hero like a Zagar and a Zebo or anything like that, where you're just throwing out more stuff than enemy, it's going to make it harder, and they go very well together is what I'm trying to say. Also note that if you have multiple Warp Rifts together, your Q will explode on both of them, so you do more damage. So just reference for shoot 'em up there. Okay guys, that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. I will talk to you next time.